Though it didn't happen then, it brings me great joy that we are able to welcome him here tonight. Friends, please join me in welcoming our hope for the future, Representative Justin Jones.
Good evening, and thank you so much. First of all, welcome to the new lead minister of this amazing and beautiful congregation, and to my dear sister and friend Vicky. Thank you so much for the invite, and to all of you gathered here. It is beautiful to be in a space that looks like the type of community that we're fighting for, a multiracial, multi-generational democracy here in the heart of the South. And so I just got off a flight not too long ago. Last night I was at the Farm Aid, if anybody watched Farm Aid last night, supporting our farmers and with some amazing musicians with my dear friend Margot Price. And I got to talk to Willie Nelson, and I asked him his advice. I'm in a church, so I won't say it word for word. I said, what is your advice for our generation in continuing the struggle in a moment like this? He said, keep kicking them in the... So that's what we're going to try and do. It is just so good to be in community in this time. You know, there is a saying that democracy dies in darkness. And I would add that creativity dies in isolation and fascism thrives in both. And so rooms like this are an antidote to that isolation and despair that is so pervasive right now, that is so intent on making us feel like we are alone, to burn us out, to make us feel like we are one against a whole entire system. But the truth is, we know that we are not only on the right side of history, but we are the majority. That those who believe in love and justice are still the majority. And as I was just at Farm Aid with farmers from all across this nation, I was reminded that sometimes we just have to remember to plant those seeds and to shake things up a little bit. And so I want to start a little differently. I had some notes, but I was thinking as I was driving here, I got into this new show recently, this new television show based off of Star Wars. And I wasn't really someone who's a Star Wars fan, but I started watching it because a lot of people recommended this show in this time, because it's about the prequel before the Emperor took over the galaxy, and how people resisted, and how it was really about the everyday efforts of regular people. And I hate to say now, because I don't want to plug that show, because unfortunately Disney Plus is owned by ABC, and obviously they didn't watch the show. Seeing what is happening now with Jimmy Kimmel and with the censorship. But there's a quote that stood out to me in that show. And it's a moment where the senator decides to step into her courage, and she gives a speech on the House floor, the Senate floor, and immediately has to evacuate because they're going to kill her. But she gives this speech, and then there she says, "The distance between what is said and what is known to be true has become an abyss. Of all the things at risk, the loss of an objective reality is perhaps the most dangerous. The death of truth is the ultimate victory of evil." And I think this speaks so urgently to the moment that we face now. A moment of disinformation, a moment in which, even on today, International Peace Day, we are honoring on all the newspapers someone who spent their life perpetuating violence and antagonism and division. And yet we read things and we forget, we're told that we do not believe our own ears and our own eyes. We see the erosion of truth. We see the loss of an objective reality where we can't even agree on basic facts. Things like the fact that slavery is wrong and is indeed a part of the American story, and that it should not be taken out of our museums. We see systems of manipulation and control. I've got so many emails just this week of professors and teachers who are being threatened with dismissal or have been removed from their positions because of censorship, because of intimidation, because of a system that is intent on forcing a dominant narrative instead of the plurality of narratives that have always defined this nation. And so we are in a dangerous time. And I think you all know that. I think you wouldn't be here if we did not know that this time is really a crossroads. And that we find ourselves at a moment in our history where there is such a thing as being too late. I was talking to some elders, and I'm grateful. Some of my elders are here. And I'm grateful for a circle of elders. I'm grateful for a community of elders, and two of them I've been speaking to. One is Miss Diane Nash, and the other is Joan Baez. And I was asking them, is this moment more scary than the 1960s? Does it seem parallels? And they said that this is even worse. Because in the 1960s, you had a Supreme Court who was willing to intervene. Brown v. Board of Education. In the 1960s, you had a federal government that at least was willing to intervene. We saw what happened at Little Rock Central High School. The National Guard was not sent to intimidate people, but was sent to ensure integration. And we've lost every institution now, even the news. Social media has been bought, controlled, manipulated. The news stations are bending the knee. University institutions have decided that they would rather be proximate to those who are enacting authoritarianism than standing for the values of academic freedom. Legal departments weaponized instead of being used as tools of societal progress and transformation, being used as weapons to silence those who disagree. I think what we have to be honest about is that we have so many people who are in offices who have a lot of political power but who don't have courage right now. Too often I see folks who confuse proximity to power, getting invited to the governor's house, getting invited to this, golf event, as opposed to building power for our people and for our future generations. Too often we see people who put their title above their purpose and are more obsessed with self-elevation than they are about elevating our community. We see the terror that is happening right now. When in American history have we had masked men snatching people from the streets? The only group I can think of was founded not too far away from here in Pulaski, Tennessee. Covered themselves, burned crosses. In the 1970s on Jefferson Street, outside the NAACP office. And yet today, we are being told that this is just something we're to accept as the new norm. Our state is bracing for the National Guard to be deployed to Memphis. And if you think they'll stop there, then you are not paying attention. We already hear one of the members of Congress, I won't call him a representative, talking about advocating to send them to Nashville. I think now is precisely the time where we must begin to strategize in places like this. What does a campaign of non-cooperation look like? Because we know that our democracy requires a disruption sometimes. That it requires us finding ways to organize in person, organizing networks of those of us who have the privilege of citizenship, of having attorneys, of having, a platform to be able to find ways. How do we start enacting those systems and those webs? Because if they come for one of us, my friends, they're coming for all of us. One of the things that I've been trying to imagine is a concept that is something that kind of came about in a roundabout way, and I want to start by explaining that, is that I'm on the Agriculture Committee. And I was put on the House Agriculture Committee as a punishment because they thought that somebody who represents an urban area would not know what to do in an Agriculture Committee. And I think any of us who eat should care about agriculture, number one. If you eat food, you should care about agriculture. And one of the most beautiful things that I'm learning on this committee is that it is going to be this blueprint of organizing these coalitions in unusual ways that is going to really be a metric of our success. And I want to give you a few examples of serving on the Agriculture Committee, a committee in which we're so often, unfortunately, default to representation that puts corporate ag and these big factory farms over the interests of small family farms. I want to start by premising with that. But some interesting things that we've been able to see is, number one, my first year there was a corporation trying to build a landfill in Columbia, Tennessee, and on the Duck River, which is the most biodiverse river in North America. And I was new to this committee, but I reached out to some of the members they were having dozens of people showing up, and like I said, I was still learning. And so I said, would you mind if I come down to Columbia and come and see for myself what is happening? And everybody who was in attendance said, we don't really have representatives who don't represent this area who want to come and actually hear us and talk to us. And so I drove down after a session one day and was able to meet with folks who, honestly, when I walked in their house, I was like, hold on. I was by myself. I was like, why are we got Fox News on? I was like a little confused a little bit. But then I realized that they had stereotypes about me and I had stereotypes about them. And that this system of what I call plantation politics is intent on trying to make us fearful of each other. And so they took me around in the gator. We went down to the river, looked at the cattle. They had all these cattle on the farm. And they did say, we're Republicans. We support Trump. But now we support you because you came down here and showed up. And I know that sounds absurd, but I think one thing that I'm realizing is that we, as a movement, cannot be the movement of drawing a circle to keep them out. Reverend Lawson taught me a poem when we were learning about the movement, and it's something he told many of us. He said, they drew a circle to keep me out. Dumb, heretic, a thing to flout, but love in me had the will to win. We drew a circle that took them in. And so one of the first lessons I want to share is that there's power in presence. Is that if we just stay in what is comfortable, if we just stay in places that are familiar, then we will not be able to build the coalitions that will transform this state and transform the South and therefore transform this nation. We have to play some offense and going to places that may feel uncomfortable. And not do it in just ways that are transactional, but do it in ways that are transformative. Continue to show up. I gotta say, the people in Columbia, some other friends who were there, it's because of them now that I own a horse, because I went down every couple of weeks to go horseback riding. And we've done that for 2 years now. And we've been able to really build a real community, real solidarity. And we were able to stop that landfill from being constructed. Another instance on that committee is building this coalition. Some of you all were there, of taking on Monsanto and Bayer as they tried to pass a bill of all things to give immunity to pesticide corporations from being sued, from filing lawsuits. And on that first committee, I think I was one of the only voices who spoke out against, and I think I was one of 2 voices who voted against it. But we were able to work with Maha people, folks who believe in RFK. And on this instance, we were in agreement that pesticides are not good for our health. And we were able to organize against these corporations. That was a bill co-sponsored by both Democrats and Republicans, I'm ashamed to say. And we were able to work and organize against an army of 15 lobbyists. If you drove around Nashville, you may have seen their billboards. If you were on YouTube, you may have seen the commercials. They spent a lot of money. But we were able, by the time it reached the next committee, to stop that bill from being enacted, because people recognize that our struggles against the other is not against each other, but it's against corporate greed. It's against economic exploitation. It's against a system that thrives on us fighting each other so that we don't look and see who's really pulling the strings. And so I share these stories just because I often have to remember these stories, because I think in these times like now, it's hard to remember that we actually have victories. And that when we organize together, we can win together. And I think that these unusual coalitions are going to be the way forward as we look at building a coalition and rooted in what I believe to be agrarian populism. Working with folks who right now are hurting. And I posted something and all these people were messaging me, they're like, why are you supporting farmers? They voted for Trump, they did this. If we have that mentality, what makes us different than our opponents? What makes us different? You know, when I got expelled from the House floor, I remember CNN or one of the news stations came out, and the first question they said is, what is your message to the people who expelled you? I said, my message is simple. To those who expelled me, we are fighting for your children and grandchildren too. We want your children and grandchildren to be safe from the terror of school shootings. We want your children and grandchildren to have access to clean water and clean air. We want your children and grandchildren to have free school lunches. We want your children and grandchildren to have access to high-quality public education. That's what makes us different. That is how we show them that we are a movement that will not allow them to change who we are. But I want to be clear about one thing too, because I saw this picture here behind me of this fire, and it reminded me of this quote. Because sometimes when we talk about being a movement of love, we think that it means being foolish and blind. And I think that, there's a saying that change comes about two ways. Either they see the light or they feel the fire. And so sometimes love looks like telling the House Speaker that you may have a gavel, but you don't have a whip, sir. Sometimes love looks like removing people from positions in which they can harm themselves and they can harm us. Sometimes love looks like showing up in ways that make people uncomfortable, to say, we want to make you, as James Baldwin said, conscious of the things that you ignore, conscious of the things you choose not to see, conscious of the ways that white supremacy is hurting you too. What did Dr. King say? He said, even with their bellies growling from hunger, they ate the bird of Jim Crow and were tricked into believing that was enough. So many of our dear sisters and brothers across the state have been tricked into believing that these folks are fighting for them when they fight for Confederate monuments or fight to keep up these statues of hate. But then let their hospitals close in these rural areas. Let their schools close because of vouchers. And so we must go with a message that says this movement is bigger than left and right. It's about what is right and wrong. This movement is bigger than these very puny labels they put on us. To say, oh, be scared of him because he's this party or this race, or he has long hair and earrings, whatever caricature they can create. And it means us showing up and saying, let's go through the list. You're struggling to afford healthcare. I'm struggling to afford healthcare. You have to choose between getting groceries or getting prescriptions. I know what that's like. When I turned 26, you were raised by a working class single mom. I was raised by a working class single mom. We have more in common than you do with that man, the Grand Wizard in Chief. We have more in common. And I think that's really a movement that we must continue to uplift, and I will continue to do it in whatever way I can, and I'm grateful to serve on the House Agriculture Committee because it's been the best place to organize with these coalitions, and so I'm grateful for that energy. I think, another thing I want to mention, and I have notes, but I just feel, I haven't been behind a pulpit in a while, and I kind of just feel that you got to go move with the Spirit. Fannie Lou Hamer had a quote. She said, you better move on over, we'll move on over you. Because we're moving on over. And I think one of the things that has been the most concerning to me is not our opponents, because we know who they are, but it's the complicity and silence of some of our own folks. It's those who tell us, as they told us the day before we were expelled, you're not an activist anymore, you're a legislator. You have to, you should just have been quiet. You should have just learned that there's a certain decorum. And what they really were saying was put your manners above your morals. What they really were saying was to adjust yourself, conform yourself, contort yourself to who they have told us we have to be. One of the first things you learn in the legislature when you walk in is, number one, half those folks can't read, don't know what they're doing. That's number one. But number two is that the way language is weaponized to create illusions of power. And I'll give you an example. You are the minority party. What does that mean? Minority automatically presumes powerlessness. And like I've told them, I said, no, I like what they say in England. We are the opposition party. Our job is to be a speed bump, to slow down this train, to make it as uncomfortable and rocky and as delayed, use every tactic to stop you from driving the train of our state across the cliff. We are the opposition party. Our role is to be a check on your power. We are the opposition party. Our role is to say that we may not win this vote, but there will be a generation who knows that when this vote came to happen, there were people who rose up in dissent and who were not silent, who were not content with allowing this to pass. One thing I do as a practice, it's something that Article 2, Section 27 of our state constitution gives us the right to do, but no, not many lawmakers use it, is that we have a right to submit our dissents into the House Journal. To write them out and say, this is our dissent. If they don't, first of all, I do it because they don't let us speak on the floor that much. But secondly, it's also to put into the record. Because a dissent is really a message to the future. A dissent is a message to the future generations to say that even though we may not have had the majority, that we were thinking about you, we loved you, we fought for you, and we knew that sooner or later something would transform. There was a Supreme Court justice who was named the Great Dissenter. The only one to vote against many of the cases before the Supreme Court, affirming that Black people were not to be treated as whole human beings. And his dissents went on to build a record so that come decades later, they were the basis of Brown v. Board of Education. A dissent is a message to the future. And I think we must continue to be a people of moral dissent. To be a people who speak up when they say be quiet, a people who say we're going to rise up when you say sit down. When they say know your place, we say we know exactly where our place is. It's right up here, making you as uncomfortable as we can. We know who we are. Do you know who you are? We are the descendants of those here in Nashville. People like Diane Nash and Bernard Lafayette and John Lewis and Reverend Palmer, people who were willing to be voices of human dignity in the time of moral absurdity and insanity and cruelty. And so what does it mean right now to be a people who are willing to put our bodies on the line? What does it mean to be a people right now who are okay with being labeled as radical or extreme? Because everything we're advocating for is not radical, but is in fact the mainstream. People have just been taught to fear certain buzzwords. But if you ask them, do you think people should have access to health care? You'll see the majority of people say yes. But if you name it Obamacare or whatever they want to call it, then people get afraid. You'll see that the vast majority of people believe we should have access to clean air and clean water. Just wait until you try and build something that pollutes in their neighborhood. Hold on, wait, we don't want that here. And so how do we organize these coalitions that break through the noise and break through the systems of fear and division that are so inherent and so ingrained? I think it's going to be something we have to think about. And I know even coming here, I think we have a new reality. As I walked into this church, like I said, I just got back from Minnesota at Farm Aid, and I was there at stopped by some of the memorial areas for the 2 legislators who were killed. We seem to have forgotten that, as not us, but it seems like the country has forgotten that fact. And so coming in here today, something that I haven't thought about in a long time, I said, there's security here. Are we going to, how do we have to be very cognizant now of these types of things. But just because we're going to be smart does not mean we're going to be fearful. And sometimes it is okay to do it afraid too. Sometimes it's okay to do it when we're still learning together. It's okay if we make mistakes. I don't believe in a movement in which we have the luxury or privilege to try and gatekeep. Too many folks I've seen in Nashville like, well, we've been in this movement for 10 years and they were just in this movement for 1 year. Welcome. We're glad you're here. Because there's a point where we were new too. There's a point where we were learning and making mistakes and didn't know all the academic terms, but we knew that this was wrong. We didn't know the language of intersectionality or, what is your theory of change? I don't know, but I know that we're going to shut this down if they keep acting crazy. And so I think we have to be a movement that is welcome and affirming and also not so intent on perpetuating the same systems we're trying to dismantle. And that's a system of gatekeeping, of a system that sells people, young people. I remember being young. I still am young. But I remember when I was younger, and I used to go to some organizations. Praise God. Yeah, amen. I'm still young. I just turned 30. But I remember when I was first organizing, and I would go to meetings with some organization. I'm not going to say names because some of y'all may know people. And people will say, we love seeing young people. We love having young people. Then we start talking. They stop saying that. And so when young people come, we got to be okay with people who may have some prophetic imagination to do things differently. It's okay. Octavia Butler said the only constant is change. But you know what? I believe in a movement that's intergenerational, and I believe that we can learn from each other. I believe we have to learn from each other. And so let's continue to welcome folks, particularly these young folks, into our movement. I was so moved. Everyone saw what happened on April 6, 2023 when we were expelled. But the reason why we were expelled, again, was not about us, but it was about silencing the voices of hundreds of young people who came to our state capitol saying, do something, do something, do something. And when I went to our leadership, I said, what are we going to do? They said, well, there's nothing on the agenda. We don't, it's not, I was like, well, we're going to make a new agenda because these young people are scared to go back to school. And so unlike here, they shut off our microphones, shut off our voting machines. So we're going to have a moment of silence, but then we have to get back to normal business. What is normal business in America? It's the fact that gun violence is the #1 cause of death of children in this nation. And so that time when they shut off our microphone, I pulled a megaphone out of my pocket. And I was thinking in my head, I know what I was thinking. I was thinking about the summer of 2016 when I interned in Washington, D.C., and there was a man who led a sit-in on the floor of the U.S. Congress after the Pulse nightclub mass shooting and said, sometimes we have to break decorum. Sometimes we have to disrupt business as normal. We see it happening on the other side. They're okay with breaking protocol. They're okay with breaking norms, tradition, doing things that are unconstitutional, doing things that are openly illegal, doing things that we know are unethical. And yet we continue to err on the side of saying, let's tiptoe around as they've set the blaze. And we are not acting like the building is on fire. Anybody here in the medical field? We got some folks in the medical field. When there is an emergency, first of all, the ambulance doesn't stop at the red lights. And then when you get into the ER, you get to the hospital, clear the way, move out the way. We need to, cold blue. We act like it's an emergency. And then I think too much right now, we don't see people acting like it's an emergency. We have folks who act like this is the normal business of saying, oh, let's be reasonable. Let's give them all, you know what, I have all the statistics of why this is wrong. I have all, that's what they're doing to our Constitution. And so what do we do? One of the most important lessons of authoritarianism and fascism is that you have a better chance at being successful in stopping it the earlier you resist it. We must be a people who hold the line. We must be a people who say that this, you're not getting past here. We will rise up. We will stand up. We will find ways in whatever field that we're in to be a force, a counterforce to your forces of authoritarianism. And so, I don't know, there's no clock. That's the problem with this church. There's no clock in here. So I don't know what time it is. I always tell, I see Miss Jane here, the story that I like to use when I was preaching with Dr. Lafayette. I always kept that in mind. He said, you know, how long do we have to preach? They said, you can preach as long as you want, but we leave at 11 o'clock. So I'm not going to hold you long. And I want to make sure that we have time for questions and answers. But I want to say this, is that in this time that feels really dark and that feels very heavy and that can feel like we're being overwhelmed, something that I'm finding is that it's okay to turn off our cell phones and that you'll find a lot more hope when you're talking to actual people. Sometimes it's okay to turn off the news and go talk to your neighbors and say, okay, click. So how are we going to organize in here to make sure that we have a system of rapid response, of mutual aid? How do we start organizing in this neighborhood? Who has the old-fashioned telephone book? Because if they control social media, if Elon Musk wants to shut it down, how are we going to be in touch with each other? Who knows how to grow vegetables? Who has some chickens? Because if we can feed ourselves, we can free ourselves. Okay. What other skills do we have? We have medical people. Okay, we have response. We have the neon guard. Okay, we have safety. We really have to start thinking like this because there are not people coming to save us this time. The federal government is not going to intervene on our behalf this time. We are in a neo-confederacy, and we're going to have to look out for each other. I would put up an army of grandmothers against these National Guards come. Imagine if we had 100 grandmothers and stand up in front of the National Guards. And y'all are laughing, but my grandmother, my grandma, I'm Black, Indigenous, and Filipino, but my grandma was in the Philippines when there was a dictator there. And one of the stories I remember, which actually led me to go to seminary, was this idea of faith and justice, where she said, you know what changed the revolution in the Philippines? It's when the nuns kneeled in front of the tanks and did their rosary and said, if you're going to go against these students, you're going to have to run us over. And it changed the trajectory. It changed, I really am serious about this idea of grandmothers or just folks finding ways to change the face of what opposition looks like. I mean, what if we all just went down there, I don't know, played, threw confetti at just something a little different, show the mockery of what this is. I saw somebody in Washington, D.C. trailing the National Guard playing the Darth Vader theme. And just to show like how absurd this is. I made a new friend when I was just in Minnesota, a representative who was a clown. And she was in the Barnum and Bailey circus. And she says, I hate when people call the politics a circus, because the circus is organized and on time. And I hate when you call them clowns, because clowns are actually highly trained. And so, in fact, clowns, the use of humor, think about how fragile, who do authoritarians come after? Often first, the comedians, the jesters, the clowns, the people who make us laugh, who take off the veil of false power and say, look at who they are. They're not as powerful as they think they are. We can laugh. It's okay to laugh at them. Creative means of resistance. Creative means of opposition. That is the prophetic imagination we're being called to in this time. And so I'll end with this. A candle is a protest at midnight. It is a nonconformist. It says to the darkness, I beg to differ. This is from Samuel Ryan, an Indian liberation theologian, and I love this quote. It's a quote. I said, if something happens to me, put this on my obituary. I just love this quote. But one thing that I'm recognizing now is that we are each other's light in this time. A candle is a protest at midnight. And so let us continue to shine that light for each other. And if yours starts getting dim, let me go ahead and say, here you go, my friend. Because I know it's tiring. I know it's lonely. I know it's hard to keep our sane mind in an unsane world. But the more we come together, the more we build together. I believe there was something in that wisdom when facing National Guard and police forces like Bull Connor. There was a generation of young people who said, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine at the governor's office, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine. Tell Bill Lee, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. All around the White House, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, all around the White House, I'm gonna let it shine. All around the White House, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Thank you all so much. Power to the people.